Bonjour, hi, good evening, Kwe. Mon nom est Émilie Retailleau, je suis conservatrice publique ici au CCA. So, my name is Émilie Retailleau, I'm curator public at CCA. Je vais commencer cet événement en reconnaissant que les peuples autochtones Ganyegéhaga de Ganawagé, Ganasadage et Aguasasne ont de longues connexions avec Tiohtià:ke, Munyang, Montréal. Leurs ancêtres, tout comme ceux des communautés Wendat, Anishinaabe et Abenaki, vivaient sur ces terres bien avant l'arrivée des colons. Aujourd'hui encore, l'île abrite de nombreuses personnes issues des Premières Nations inuites et peuples métis. Ces communautés continuent de subir la remise en cause de leurs droits et l'érosion de leur territoire traditionnel provoquée par les mécanismes du colonialisme d'implantation, système qui persiste encore de nos jours. Le CCA étant établi sur des territoires qui n'ont jamais été cédés par leurs populations autochtones, nous reconnaissons donc les racines coloniales de notre institution et nous nous engageons à favoriser des relations inclusives et positives avec les nations autochtones de Tiohtià:ke, Munyang, Montréal et d'ailleurs. Ce soir, je suis vraiment très heureuse de vous accueillir à l'occasion de la conférence de Yutong Lin, Planter le jardin de Zomia ou Sowing, Zomia Garden, a lecture by Yutong Lin. So, Yutong is a fantastic person first, and then she is also a writer and an image maker, originally from Yunnan, the southwestern province of China. Graduating from Concordia University with a degree on film studies, she is interested in the informal practice of archiving and documenting, as well as stories related to everyday objects and affections, but also plants, as we will see. So she is the 2023-2024 CCA Emerging Curator Fellow, currently preparing a publication ready in late August, beginning of September, on the topic she will present tonight. So Yutong will retrace the journeys of early 20th-century plant hunters and missionaries from Europe and the US who explored southern and southwestern China for botanical specimens. So through this exploration, Yutong studies the global scope and lasting impacts of botanical enterprise. So tonight, this lecture is part of a series of talks on seeds, politics, and sovereignty, inviting collaborators and researchers to discuss these topics through the lens of colonialism, knowledge transmission, displacement, and the climate crisis. Merci d'accueillir avec moi Yutong Lin.
Zomia Garden is a story about plant history. And let's start by thinking of figures of botany. What came to your mind? For me, I want to start with this still that I took in a greenhouse of the Montreal Botanical Garden in the winter of 2021. It was my first winter. It was also when all signs of life seemed suspended, and the air felt really bracing and slow. I walked in a greenhouse and suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. I felt there was an activation of my subtropical consciousness in this controlled environment for the plants. I thought of the gentle monsoon, the lingering drizzling rain, the unbearably intense sunlight, and the slightly stingy feeling of highland sunburn. And of course, the life and color, the abundance and generosity of plants from my hometown in the southwest province of Yunnan in China. Walking in this greenhouse, I felt strange. I felt bittersweet. There is something in my mouth that I couldn't articulate. The bitterness slightly overpowers the joyfulness of resonating with this curated environment. I am not quite sure what that was. As I continue my lonesome tour in the botanical garden, I notice an educational map introducing different botanical cultures and forest types around the world. I couldn't help but think about the tone of a pedagogical neutrality of an imagined visitor who would stop and take a look at this map. What kind of feelings do they have? How would our climate and botanical proximity be rendered through cartography and storytelling? Staring at this map, I realized the strange feeling in me, looking at all the plants that don't belong here, if not for this greenhouse. I became curious, and I'm wondering, where do all these non-native plants come from, and how they came to be at this certain place? What kind of route and journey have they taken, and whose hands have they been through to be planted? I wanted to feel the weight and texture of enthusiasm, of sincerity and care of botanical lives, without understating the violence and plunder of botanical resources from different geographies. And this was the initial impulse that fueled my inquiry of botanical history, and gradually I got closer to plant hunters. The name plant hunter carries such a brave and fascinating charisma, alluring to scenes of searching for plants in the wild. The story of plant hunter starts from around the 18th century in southern China, so around these regions. The informal flora and fauna collection began with colonial missionary and expats. Early missionaries often began as amateur collectors, gathering plants out of their personal interests or under loose guidance of botanists and scientists in their home countries. As they traveled, they gathered unfamiliar flora, including their specimen and seeds, and sometimes commissioned botanical illustrations and drawings and sent them back across oceans, though not always with a clear scientific purpose. Over time, this informal practice gave way to more structured botanical inquiry, becoming intertwined with the development of formal institutions like botanical gardens, research centers, and commercial seed trading companies. In parallel, global plant exchange routes were slowly formed, waving through Asia, Europe, and Americas, shaping by the movement of missionary and colonial agents during the late age of discovery. At the same time, the Swedish biologist Carl Linnaeus established a breakthrough moment in plant classification by introducing his standardized binomial system in 1753. This system assigned each plant a two-part Latin name, combining a genus name with a specific epithet. Often, the name of the discoverer is appended at the end. This system became a universal way to inscribe and account for botanical authorship through standardized naming system, thus render plants as collectible, knowable property of the global botanical enterprise. In learning about botanical history, I try to bear in mind how these assumptions about nature and land are inscribed in a way of name and ways of naming things as a geographical and botanical orientation. This gradual development in botanical science prompted the birth of plant hunters as an official occupation for the empire's gardens, which peaked in the 19th and 20th century. When plant hunters have been more professionalized, they were usually trained at a European or American botanical gardens or through programs founded by seeds company. The verb of hunting in plant hunter not only gesture adventure, but also indicate a sense of taming and conquering the plants and landscape, as if they were passive and silent, waiting to be found if the hunter puts his mind to it. If you are a gardener or are fond of plants like me, you may have heard fascinating stories of famous plant hunters who work as botanical explorers, venture through sweeping and sublime landscape to search for famous and rare plants. Amongst the sites of sourcing, my hometown between the mountains and clouds of the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalaya Henduan mountain range was one of the primary and fertile grounds for botanical exploration during the 20th century for its one-of-a-kind biodiversity and one of the most complex, low-altitude alpine landscape. This is a transitional region between the Tibetan Plateau and the deep valley of the three turbulent rivers of the Yangtze, Lancang, Meigong, and Nu Sowing. Here is where the story begins. And I want to show a video that I took during my research trip last year. It was between the border of China and Myanmar in the prefecture of Nujiang. And through this video, we can get a sense of the landscape. And people there often joke about when they go into the city, they will be afraid that the sky will fall down because it's always, you always feel like the mountains hold up the sky. So you can see it was very hard to reach, and the valley was very deep, and the difference in elevation is very obvious. And that is the reason why there is a really difference in variety and kinds of plantations in vegetations in different altitude. So let's take a closer look at the routes of plants and seeds and the botanical elsewhere. So let's go back to this British map of China. Following the First Opium War in 1840 between the British Empire and the Manchu Empire, increasing missionary and colonial activity in China, South Asia, and Southeast Asia spurred extensive survey of the region's landscape and resources. Missionaries were able to establish churches and posts in designated concessions in treaty ports like Guangzhou, Shanghai, Xiamen, among others. These sites give access to trading as well as natural exploration and traveling. So the missionary and business person, they enter through the treaty port along the coast and gradually make their way to, this is Canton, and Guangxi and Yunnan is here. And this is the region where a lot of the plant hunters were working. In Lijiang and the broader Himalayan and Tibetan regions, it is a very crucial base for generations of plant hunters during the late 19th century and early 20th century. This era of exploration came to a close with the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, when foreigners were expelled under the new political regime. I often picture these plant hunters as long travelers in the wild. In reality, it was rarely the case. However, there was indeed exceptions. Take Père Jean-Marie de Lavey, a French missionary, as an example. Père de Lavey is probably the first plant hunter to reach Yunnan and Tibet. He got there thanks partially to another missionary, Père Armand David, who convinced him to collect for the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. From 1882, for 13 years, Père de Lavey worked completely alone in the remote high mountains of northern Yunnan, the Diqing Tibetan region. Tragically, he died there in 1895. He never fully recovered after catching a bubonic plague during his work. He built one of the largest plant collections ever made, a staggering 200,000 specimens, mostly from those high alpine zones. Among those, he discovered 1,500 completely new species. He introduced Duotia, Rhododendron, Primula, and Osmanthus to France. And back in Paris, his correspondent botanist Adrien Franchet at the museum used Delave's massive collection to publish a major work, Plantes de la Vienne, documenting these alpine discoveries in 1890. Père Delave was an exception. After him and Père David, most plant hunters travel with large local indigenous crews and porters who also work as their guides and fellow plant hunters. Among them was the legendary English plant hunter Frank Kingdon Ward, who worked primarily with Tibetan guides. He worked for the Kew Garden, Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and Bees Horticulture Company of the UK. He preserved seeds of the iconic Himalayan blue poppy, as you can see on the screen. It is one of the most magic and beautiful plants. He's the one who preserved the seeds, though Père Delave was the first one to document it and introduce it to the rest of the world outside of the Himalayas. Kingdon Ward is a person who managed to bring the seeds. And he's also a writer who wrote with vivid details about his journey through Yunnan and Tibet in his book, The Mystery Rivers of Tibet. In this book, his keen geographical survey and writings were among the most thorough of the time, laying the groundwork for key mountain range demarcation based on this area's intricate river system. And there was another English plant hunter named Ernest Henry Wilson, trained also at the Kew Garden in London. He famously cast the dove tree, which are also called Davidia, as his own auric and legendary discovery, where in reality he was employed by the seeds company James Vick and Sons to search for a bunch of different economically profitable plants. This story, with all its entanglement with historicity, fiction, and plant hunters' self-mythologization, will be unpacked by one of the Zomia Garden project's contributing writer, Benny, in an upcoming publication series hosted on the CCA's website to be released next month. Benny used the term botanical elsewhere to describe Wilson's journey in relation to his fantasy of a geography filled with desire and longing, loss and wonder, which resonated with the melancholia and romance of botany. In Wilson's own writing, he once praised China as a mother of gardens, a metaphor that underscored the richness and abundance of Chinese botanical resources to the Western gardens. But who is the father of gardens? Are plant hunters the father of gardens? Under the Linnaean system of binomial nomenclature, many plants bear the name of these plant hunters who discovered this species, yet their local guides remain largely and often intentionally unmentioned. By framing a foreign land as a mother, gendered in such a way to imply silence and sacrifice, the metaphor feels more like a deliberate avoidance to address who and what enabled the botanical knowledge production than truly and meaningfully appreciate the contribution from the land and its people. So, moving away from the stories of early generation of plant hunters, I found my intuition rubbed against these heroic narratives. There's something missing, I think, in this story, something too straightforward and something felt too sure. There was extensive research and writing on these plant hunters' biography, their personal life, their personhood, and authorship. I am wondering if we can reorient our way of learning and approaching this history not through the act of creating figures, a way of concretizing their marks on the landscape, but rather Is it possible to treat them as agents of encounters? Thus, we can decenter their personhood and move beyond a simplistic moral judgment about their deeds, rather than being trapped in those kind of debates of whether they are good or bad people. Ultimately, I want to ask through this project how we can inhabit ambivalence in botanical history with meaningful rather than performative indigenous agency. So let's restart, this time from the land, not from the person. Now we came to this small village called Uluken in Lijiang. My exploration dived into the botanical narrative deeply rooted in the Himalayan culture. Amidst this rich botanical life, Himalayan communities have cultivated a distinctive intimacy and understanding of nature. Before, I also assumed that plant hunters, armed with their Western scientific knowledge and resources, always held the upper hand during their botanical expedition. While that might have been true in their working relationship with their guides, in many cases, the understanding of geography and the sociality with the earth quickly collapsed. In conceiving their collecting routes, plant hunter often oversimplified the complexity and unpredictable change of the mountainous terrain. Lacking on-the-ground experience in the mountains, they had to depend on the botanical expertise and navigational skills of local guides to lead the way and provide protections. Sometimes it even means to fend off wild animals and ruthless bandits, though such efforts were rarely acknowledged in their botanical history. In the village of Uluken, at the foot of the Yulong Snow Mountain, you can see this is the west slope of only a really small part of the mountain range. The mountain range rises from an elevation of 2,500 meters as its base and over 5,500 meters at its highest peaks. This village served as a base for the last generation of plant hunters, including the Scottish plant hunter George Forrest and the Austrian-American plant hunter Joseph Rock. And I'm always really amused by their name, plant hunter, Forrest and Rock. I think it's a destiny that they are going to be plant hunters. Their journey of plant collection were intertwined with the botanical cultures of the Himalayas in very unexpected ways. They work closely with my Nasi ancestors, and we are a small ethnic group living between Yunnan and Tibet. We were nomads and herdsmen in the untraceable past and gradually migrated from the Tibetan plateau around the Qinghai Huangshui area and finally settled in Yunnan and merged with other fugitive and nomad communities of the Himalayan mountains. And here are some photos I took during a foraging trip at the west slope of Yulong Snow Mountain with Uncle He, who know well the mountain and medicinal plants in the mountain. During the beginning of the 20th century, the Scottish plant hunter George Forrest came to China. He initially formed partnerships with Nasi, led by Zhao Chenzhang, similar to Uncle He, who know really well the geography and vegetation in the mountains. And Forrest taught them how to make specimens and make labels for a botanical collection. Even when Forrest was not in the region, they would still collect for him and ship the plants and seeds back to the Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh. And this is the family house of the Zhao family, who used to work with George Forrest and Joseph Rock. And their family now moved into the urban area of Lijiang, and it became an empty place in the village. This is a photo taken by Joseph Rock instead of Forrest. It shows the process of making plant specimens by Rock's collaborators. So it depends on the humidity and kinds of plants. The worker will press them really, really tight in between those binders and dry them and change the sheets that absorb the water in the plants every day or every other day. And it takes about 3 to 7 days to prepare the specimens. And then they would ship them to the ports, maybe in Vietnam, and eventually going on their routes to the UK. Forrest's co-worker Zhao Chenzhang may have been the most productive plant hunter of the 20th century, even though his name was seldom mentioned, since Forrest only ever referred to him as Old Zhao. It is questionable if Forrest ever even learned his name. The only place where Zhao Chenzhang's name appeared properly is in the last sets of notes and maps that documented where the plants were collected when Zhao Chenzhang sent Forrest's final plant specimen back to Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh. The reason being Forrest's sudden death in Yunnan. Before he would carefully annotate the specimens in English and erase the Chinese writings by his collaborators, and he makes sure those marks are not added to the final products. Luckily, there have been changes to recognize the Naxi contribution to botanical research. In 2020, a new plant native to Lijiang's Yulong Snow Mountain, Barbaris zhao, has been named after Zhao Chenzhang, thanks to the continuous recovery of the indigenous history of plant hunting, especially the experimental ethnography work by the American anthropologist Eric Mugler in his book, The Paper Road, Archive and Experience in the Botanical Exploration of West China and Tibet. And this is a book full of love. I couldn't recommend it more. So back to their collecting trip, rhododendron was among Forrest's principal collection in Yunnan, a region renowned for its extraordinary diversity of this species. Forrest somehow really believed in the existence of a central garden for rhododendron and was determined to found it. In his opinion, the evolution of rhododendron evolved like a linear trajectory radiating outward from this center, where theories of evolution found its proof. Along the way to this imagined garden, he faced several setbacks and disputes from his Naxi guides due to danger, unfeasibility, and sometimes superstitions as well. And his quest for the Eden of rhododendron was abruptly cut short due to his sudden death. During his years in China, Forrest never bothered to learn Mandarin, much less the Naxi language. Since his guides and him, they cannot really understand each other. I'd imagine their communication contains a lot of mumbling, guessing, imagining, gesturing, and pointing to maps and objects, trying to understand each other. There was a mutual imagining between their work relationship. Concepts like rhododendron and center may have really different meanings for both of the parties. Language, rather than being a barrier, may have accidentally facilitated a space, a speculative one, that created the routes for collecting rhododendron. For the Naxi, when they heard center and rhododendron or things close to that, we'd imagine a road that might have been informed by our Donba scripture and rituals, serving as instrument of wayfinding. Donba is a local ritualistic practice that recorded considerable geographical and natural knowledge through a pictorial drawing system. These writings can only be activated through a ritualist who is also called a domba, who will chant the verses during events of blessings, purges, and other cosmological interventions. And here is a Domba teacher. His name is He Xipeng. He was showing me one of the Domba scriptures, and it looked like this little booklet. Anthropologist Eric Mugler thinks that the routes Forrest and his Nasi guides followed were oriented less by Forrest's map and imaginaries, but by the cosmology and geographical knowledge of the Nasi. What the Nasi imagined where Forrest wanted to go may have been what has been recorded as our ancestral land in Domba scripture. Although they never reached Forrest's imagined center of rhododendron, Zhao Chenzhang and other Nasi ultimately helped Forrest bring over 300 species of rhododendron back to the Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh, along their collecting trips. Forrest's successor, Joseph Rock, is another really interesting plant hunter. He first traveled to Burma in search for the potential cure for leprosy, the chomogra tree, by a commission from the United States Department of Agriculture. He journeyed further from Burma to Yunnan, where he met George Forrest, and George Forrest was a person who recommended Rock to come up to Lijiang, and eventually Rock settled there and developed a base in the village of Ulukan. This is Rock's former bedroom, and now it was restored. It was destroyed during Cultural Revolution and kind of abandoned as well, and was restored by a Nasi entrepreneur, and now it is open as a public exhibition hall that showcases the experiences and some of the publications and photographs of Rock. And this is a illustrative routes that Rock and the Nasi took on their botanical journey, and it was in Rock's Memorial Hall in the old town of Lijiang. Rock and his Nasi crew, as you can see on this map, they traveled to the Haba Snow Mountain Kingdom of Muli and the Animating Mountains and Mount Gonga. For over 27 years, Rock and his team collected more than 15,000 plant specimens, preserved nearly 1,000 bird skins and over 200 colorful butterflies, and took 1,055 photographs. Compared to Forrest's contempt to local culture, Rock was more absorbed and transformed by Nasi's sensibility through his plant hunting journeys. Though he still performed a certain level of superiority with the locals, he had been actively engaged in documenting Domba rituals. He became fascinated by the practice and knowledge and eventually dedicated himself to being a translator and composed the first and only Nasi English dictionary. He was most interested in the geographical journey of my Nasi ancestors, our arrival in this world and return of souls to the ancestral land in the afterlife. So when a person passes away, a Domba priest will recite a wayfinding scripture, reversing a route to lead the soul back to our ancestral place. In the wayfinding scripture, rhododendron bloom on the Junazolo mountain as a final destination for the dead. Many communities across the Himalayas ground our collective identity in founding narratives that recount departures. This story often traces how people, while evading imperial domination, gradually form new bonds of belongings. This reflects a distinct relationship with geography, one shaped by history of flight and nomadism. People move as guests of the land, as if just passing through, with ultimate journey being a return to the dreamed-of ancestral land. This ancestral land, however, always points elsewhere, to a distant place left behind, while the land we now inhabit were reached by crossing mountains and rivers. After studying Dongbas sculpture, Rock grew fixated on the notion that Naxi's ancestral migration might align with his own botanical expeditions to the Animating. You can see in this photo, it's Rock and his crew, and they're on a trip to Yongning, northern of Lijiang, to the Muli Kingdom in Tibetan Khang region. And it was before their epic trip to the Animating. For Rock, the act of translating the Dongbas sculpture also involved determining how to render the sensibility and orientation of being in the world. As a translator, he gradually developed a system to recompose Dongbas recitations into narratives, embedded them within his maps, images, and experiences. For Rock, botanical expedition eventually opened toward a more profound translation mission to chart the unspoken social relation that ties together people and geographies. Language came to function as a cartographic coordinates, orienting his movements and understanding in a foreign place. And some of the people who work closely with him, including Lü Wanyu, Li Shicheng, who eventually together went on a trip to the States, a study trip to the States, and they bring back plants from the US and other tools as kind of a botanical exchange, not really botanical exchange, other technical exchange as well, and botany being the point of encounter. And later, the anthropologist Eric Mugler identified other members in his crew through countless diary readings and oral histories. So their names are He Ji, He Guangyu, Yang Jidian, Lü Wanxin, Li Shiwen, Li Shixi, He Zhu, He Zixiu, and He Wenli. This is a dictionary that Rock made. He decomposed little parts from the Dongbas sculpture and wrote very meticulously about what they mean and how they're used and what are the cultural connotations. And sometimes it's his own anecdotes of something he encountered during their trip. And he is also really fond of music, and we will go back to this point of musicality and geography. So by positioning the region's botanical culture and cosmology as a key navigator of plant hunting routes, we shift our perspective away from paradigms of credibility, possession, knowledge as conquest, and toward mutuality, including the shared moments of mutual imagining, misunderstanding, and misinterpretation. This shift expands the possibility for inquiry and curiosity with this troubled history. So what is Zomia in Zomia Garden? It is a term drawn from several Tibeto-Burman languages. It means hill people. Another anthropologist, James Scott, borrowed this term to denote the vast, resistant mountain geography of the South and Southeast Asian Massif, which was beyond the control of lowland empires. If you look at old imperial stories, remote borderlands like Zomia were usually framed as obstacles. Zomia was not really a concrete, clearly defined region, but only loosely denoted region across the mountainous terrains of South and Southeast Asia. In reality, people of Zomia have a long history of pushing back against state control. Zomian assert agency by moving, adapting culturally, and maintaining decentralized structures. Extraordinary ethnic and linguistic plasticity makes this region impossible to pin down on a single map or unify under one culture. Zomia, in a sense, is a particular kind of relation to navigate imperial pressure while living intimately with the mountain. Seeds and plants like a piece of the land stitch the Himalaya into the global project of botany. It can be contradictory at times. As we speak, a lot of the forests are now fallen for timber and hydropower back home, while some plants are preserved in botanical reverence on foreign soil. Eric Mugler reminded us botany is a sociality with earth more than anything else. It is a process that, and I quote, we inscribe perception of the earth onto paper to store, manage, interpret, organize, communicate, or create value from them. We fold this paper back into the earth as we name, plan, build, order, and administer, end quote. Reading botany is to confront the lament and regrets, precarity, and hope. So going back to the point of musicality and geography, I keep going back to this scene of a gramophone during Rock's expedition. He would bring a gramophone with him and sometimes gather the villagers or the monks, in this case, to listen to the music that he likes as such a gesture to trying to communicate with each other. One of the other really truly heartened moments for me during my time with Rock was reading him, fascinated by the songs that he overheard his Nazi guides were singing during his trip. And that was the little music notes that he noted. Though Rock could not understand the lyrics at the time nor fully grasp this form of communication, where song and music intertwined with the broader rhythm of nature, their resonance must have left a deep impression on him. These songs, like this intuitive map made by the most proliferate Nazi plant hunter Zhao Chenzhang, reveal the lyrical imaginations of the world, unfolding experience of sorrow in telling about the experience of the world. So this is a tree that was brought back by Rock, along with two of his guides, Lu Wanyu and Li Shichen, along their US trip. And they bring back little small trees, and another guide named Zhao Chongdian, who also worked closely with Rock, planted the tree, and now it became really, really big, and it's kind of became a landmark of the village. And it's where people stop their horses, and kind of also shows a direction of the village. And the first time I saw it, it was really big. I couldn't even capture the tree on one negative. So in the end, I took multiple photos and assembled them together and made this collage of this eucalyptus tree. And it's always the partial and the collage, I think, that makes the experience. So I want to end this by a Nazi folk song, a really short piece. It's only about 1 minute, and it was performed by my great-grandmother, who passed away about 10 years ago. And it was probably really similar to the kind of songs that Rock heard over their trips. And I think it really captured the texture of the geography and the sorrow, sadness, of that landscape. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I had a question about like when Forest and Rock were visiting, how were the locals like engaging with them? Like, did they understand this, like what the plant hunters were meant to do, or were they aware of like what was happening, or?
Yes, I think they understand, but more like employment, because when they came was the beginning, the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and it was a time when China was really unstable and it was transitioning between the empire and the republic, the public of China. So it's already very hard. So when someone came all the way and give you a job, people would take it, and working with them also give you some kind of security, because you have they have connection with the border officers. Like in Vietnam, they are protected by French, by the British embassy, and they have more connections and resources, so they know what they are getting into, and they know they also are working to collect plants, and these people want the plants.
Was the system in China like of naming plants completely different?
It's very random. I was talking to a rhododendron expert, and she worked over 30 years in naming and classification rhododendron, and the Latin name is very standardized, so it's usually, but also it's the person who found it have the liberty to kind of choose the epithet that they want and append their name at the end. But in Chinese naming system, it's you can do, if you are the people who are doing the classification, sometimes you correspond to the English name. Sometimes you came up with your own more descriptive and imaginative ways. But for the kind of botanical scientific, it's more or less similar, but in folk naming, it's like very, very wild and very random.
Thank you.
Thank you. I learned a lot. I learned so much. I was curious if, like, this part of history, like the concept of plant hunters, is that like common knowledge in that region? Like, do the common person know about like, oh, like years ago there were people who came here and like took so many of the plants to bring it back to different like Western countries?
I don't think it's that common, but because Lijiang is also a really, really touristy town, so there are here and there some of little like landmarks and saying, oh, like there was this plant hunter who was here. So if you pay attention, you would have known, but I wouldn't say it's a common knowledge. And during the Cultural Revolution, all these people who have worked with plant hunters, they were deemed as imperial collaborators and spies. So even though they have maybe like little tools that was given by the plant hunters or other like kind of exchange of gifts and things like that, they would hide it or they would like discard all the evidence of that. But now it's because of tourism, it's like more and more visibility of this part of history and people think it's cool. So, but only for the kind of adventure lore, but not really about the part that they are stealing a lot of really valuable botanical resources. But now I think it's very sensitive to like not let plants in and out, like border control and everything, it's really hard. So it's not the case anymore.
There's some pictures of like places in Lijiang where there's like, oh, like this is the rock's residence, you know, like so like there, I feel like there are mention of like these plant hunters and like when you go into these spaces, do they mention the Nazi collaborators, or is it more about the Western plant hunter?
I'd say it's more about these plant hunters. And there are also oral history collected kind of around kind of some anecdotes. But there are a lot of oral history, local oral history that are dedicated to Nazi plant hunters who work with them.
When you were mentioning earlier that you kind of made this connection with the sort of paternalistic attitudes of naming plants and the power naming the object, you know, gives the person who names it. And I was just kind of wondering, kind of similar to what the other person had asked about the kind of more native, or as you said, like messier native names that they had, these plants, especially something like rhododendron, which seems to have a lot of spiritual significance to the Nakshi. I was wondering if you knew like the names of those in like the indigenous languages of the region, specifically the Nakshi language.
Yeah, yes, it's different. Rhododendron has actually different spiritual significance. I didn't know this before, and it was a Donba teacher who told me the rarest one is the yellow one, and I think that was also preserved at Botanical Garden and Royal Botanical Garden, Edinburgh. The really small yellow ones that are used in like blessings and rituals. I know the Chinese name. For the Nasi variation, I don't know all of them. But only the Donba teacher will know exactly how you call them.
Just to like add on to that, like when these plant hunters, like these Western plant hunters came and like documented these species and brought them back for like Western scientific use and whatnot, do you feel as though like any of the cultural context surrounding these plants got lost? Like did rock or forest ever document like the significance of these plants, medicinal, spiritual, personal, etc., in their classifications and collections of these?
Yes, Rock did, but I think he separates the botany part and the cultural part. He wrote, he's also a really great ethnographer, I think. He wrote very extensively about his travels and journeys and the cultures, and that's why he became a translator in the end. Not so much forest, he doesn't really care, he just take and go. And most of them are like that, take and go. And it's really rock is an exception. But even that, I think he didn't take botany and culture as something that together, but really this like in a discipline, maybe less in his translational work that you can see some of the mixture of botanical lives and geographical lives and his own interpretation. But he really treats botany as botany and like scientifically document that. And I guess, yeah, that's his approach, as I can see in the archives.
I have like a very similar parallel question. You know, in the encounter between the plant hunters and the people who live there, What is the kind of conflicting value system? So I think you're pointing to that. So in plant hunting, did the values change according to these encounters and the exchange? Or did it, and this must be different in terms of the early 20th century and later, but can you speak to that relation?
Do you mean in terms of how they see things
Like
in
the-
different value?
Yeah, so, okay, what was a plant to hunt? And did that change, was that informed by what you call culture or kind of more local values of plants?
Yes, I think there must be a difference in seeing plants for sure. And maybe it's also really depends on the plant hunter themselves, like what they value aesthetically, economically, and a lot of those are economic reasons because they want to reproduce them and they want to hybridize them. So they want to found species that have those kind of potential, and those are not necessarily maybe are of consideration of the Nazi, and some of the medicinal use may not be considered by the.
So just for clarification, you mean that it's able to reproduce, so to seed back?
Yes, by the seeds and saplings, and they did a lot of hybridization. So because it's really our alpine altitude in Lijiang is rather high, and UK is really low. So to adjust that, they hybridize that with a lot of local species. And now there is an initiative by the Royal Botanical Garden in Edinburgh to re-indigenize the plants that are taken from Yunnan. A lot of them are endangered. So there's a mission to re-indigenize the plants from the UK and reintroduce them to Yunnan. But there is also questions around genetic contamination because this region doesn't know UK species at all, so will that be a danger to reintroduce that and pose a threat to other alpine vegetations because they're very, very fragile, and little changes in the climate and other vegetation would immediately show.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And I'm just slightly extending sort of two questions, somewhat touched on this. So I'm just, do these explorers encounter Chinese medicine? I mean, Chinese and Tibetan people are like botanists are creating and I assume classifying and naming and creating and plants and working with plants for centuries and millennia. So I wondered if there was an encounter with the plants and the plant species, but also with the culture of using the plants in maybe both medicines and also in foods. Like, do they transport other aspects of Chinese culture and of their interactions with sort of Chinese botanists, or I don't know what the name for it in China was at the time, but there was an equivalent of Chinese and Tibetan plant hunters doing the same things.
Yes.
Are somewhat the same things.
Yes, I think I'm not exactly sure how they must encounter that, and their guides must constantly talk about what kind of plants can be used medicinal or you can edible and all that. But I don't think that was very obvious in their accounts, or maybe I wasn't deep enough to look at the medicinal and edible parts of their research, because their main goal is aesthetic and economic.
So thank you very much. It was extremely interesting.
Thank you.
And I have a question for you. It's traditional Chinese medicine is renowned for its knowledge and plants and its herbal dictionaries. Have the plants from this region been incorporated in the Chinese pharmacopoeia? And was the Central Imperial Authority interested in the botanical wealth of this region.
Could you repeat? You were saying a very specific plants, right?
No, just in general. I wonder if those plants have been part of the Chinese traditional medicine, and if the central imperial power was interested in this botanical wealth of this region previous to the foreigners coming to this region for that reason.
Not really, I don't think so. Not really. It was the missionary who kind of not really discovered, but they are the one who begin to do it. And after them, I think it was just really turbulent area, and botany wasn't the thing of concerns. And there's like hunger and wars and everything, so it probably there for sure there are local botanical documentations like medicine and others, but it's really like local. There's the central government may have also in the local gazetteers, they would document different species as like just official documentation, but they are not really profiting, I don't think, or trying to think of it as merchandise. And after those plant hunters, they realized it, they did it, and during the 50s, 60s, there are a lot of Chinese botanists who are doing similar things in identifying and looking for new species and doing botanical research. So they kind of initiated this project of the alpine vegetation in the Tibetan Yunnan region.
And is there an interest in modern Chinese medicine to integrate those plants?
Yes, there are some major companies now that are doing cosmetics, using some of the local plants and medicine as well. But yeah, and also their goal is really trying to mass produce something that you can only forage. I don't know if that will work, but you can see a lot of laboratory and initiative in that area as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again.